You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody. Returning to Katahdin, an Appalachian Trail dream. Have you ever dreamt of hiking the AT? Bruce Matson did, so we're going to follow him every step of the way. Hi, and I know that it was kind of over a month ago, but we just can't let go of Katahdin without one last chat. So welcome to Returning to Katahdin, an Appalachian Trail dream for one last hurrah with Bruce. This is episode number 45 and the one where he reflects after a month back home with his family and his friends. I wanted to give Bruce that time to allow him the space to let it all sink in. I can tell you though, I'm editing this on Saturday, the 29th of September, with the publication of the show on the 1st of October. And today is the 4th anniversary of my Katahdin summit, and not a single day has passed since that day 4 years ago that I haven't thought about Katahdin in some way or other. This is an obsession, folks, so be careful what you wish for. It will never, ever leave you. We'll get on to Bruce in a moment, but I really wanted to speak first with Cheryl, his lovely wife, and as you'll hear later, she plays a part in the chat with Bruce, entirely without his knowledge. Cheryl joined Bruce and his buddy G-Bolt on the Katahdin run and was there with him at the sign. I wanted to know how that was and really how Bruce has been in her eyes since he returned home. Here's Cheryl. Okay, well, first up we have the star of the show, which is Cheryl, Bruce's wife. Hi, Cheryl. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
He called you
not quite the star.
Well, and he called you he actually called you the star because you took on Katahdin. So what do you think about Katahdin?
Oh my goodness! Well, before I went, I watched a lot of YouTube videos of the hike to the summit.
Right.
And I was actually scared to death to do it, but I really, really wanted to go, and I really wanted to be with him when he finished. So I told him I'd be there at the first step and I'd be there at the last step. So I really did want to go, but I was scared to death to do it. I am afraid of heights.
Good idea to climb Katahdin when you're afraid of heights. Excellent idea.
I know. And actually, looking back, it was only the 1 mile of the rock scramble that gave me any pause.
Yeah.
The first 3 miles were great. The tableland was great. Yes. The summit was great. But that 1 mile, I don't think I've ever been so scared in my whole life.
Really? Did you worry about falling, or did you have any issues with the strength to get up there?
Well, I would say kind of both. You know, it seemed those boulders seemed really dangerous to me if you fall. And I know Bruce had said many times he had fallen, and if the rocks are slippery and I wondered at that very entrance to that 1 mile where the rebar is in the rock.
Yeah.
If I could actually make it up there. That to me was the point of no return. You know, if I got up there, I was headed to the top, but if I couldn't make it up there, I would just stay. You know, I would just go back to the car and wait for them. And honestly, G-Bolt and Bruce could not have been more gracious and more helpful. And they were especially gracious to allow me to share in that important day. It was a very important day for them.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And I'm sure it took me much, much longer than it would have taken them to do it. But they were so gracious and so helpful. And really looking back, it was really fun, even though I was terrified.
Did you?
I'm so glad.
I'm sure you're glad you did it. Yeah. Did you observe?
I am.
Did you observe the relationship between Bruce and G-Bolt? How important it was for the two of them to be summiting together?
Oh, absolutely. And what a wonderful guy G-Bolt is, and I can see how they really interacted well, and just a really great guy. And I think they had a great friendship through Maine.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for him that he and Bruce were together and they were able to help each other.
Yeah.
because I think at that point in New York, when Bruce was really down, I think he really struggled there for a little while, and I'm so grateful he found someone.
I'm sure you listened to you have listened to the show as the weeks have gone on, and if you remember, Bruce said he actually prayed the night before he met G-Bolt. So I thought that was an interesting thing.
I don't doubt that. I think they both said to each other that each other was an answer to prayer.
Yeah.
So I'm so grateful they found each other, and had a really, I think, a really good time. Bruce started, not that he didn't enjoy it in New York, but I think he really enjoyed Maine and really enjoyed New Hampshire.
Yeah, see, they're awesome. Those last two states are just absolutely awesome. So you went up Katahdin. Can you now, and you must, I say you've probably heard the show a few times and you've watched these YouTube videos. Can you see what the fuss is all about getting up Katahdin?
Oh, my goodness, yes. That's an accomplishment in itself, just doing that. And, of course, they had been hiking for 5 or 6 months. And, me, it was a one-day thing.
It's the ultimate. Yes, it's the ultimate ending, though, isn't it? Because you were with him when you went to the top of the summit at Springer, didn't you? Up from the car park. Uh-huh. Can you imagine that being your last half mile, going up that scrubby little path to the top of Springer to finish your hike? I just couldn't myself.
Well, I imagine if you've walked 2,200 miles, you're just happy to summit anywhere.
Yeah, you're probably right. You're probably right, yeah.
I can see where Katahdin, what a spectacular finish, and it was gorgeous the day we were there. Yeah. And the views are stunning. They are just beautiful there. I mean, it just was lovely.
Yeah. So what was it when you finished and you got to the top and you'd celebrated? I know you had to hurry down because it did take you quite a while to get up there, didn't it? So you had to move on down. Getting down, people don't really talk about that much, but it is. To me, it was more difficult than going up in many ways because some of these steep things, especially on the rebar, my gosh, they were really tough, weren't they?
Oh my goodness, yes. In fact, I was so teary at the top at the sign. I think. And Bruce asked me, he said, "Why are you so sad?" And I said, "I'm not really sad. They were really tears of joy and gratitude that they had both made it safely and in good health." But I said, "I'd love to celebrate, but I'm not going to celebrate till we're back at the car because we've got a long way to go on the way down." And I really thought the way down was more dangerous and more difficult than the way up.
I agree entirely.
And it did take us longer, and they were so helpful and so wonderful to me. But it was really fun to do together, and I really appreciated being with both of them that day. It's such an accomplishment, and they should both be so proud of themselves.
Yeah. Now,
I know what they've accomplished.
Oh, totally. And you know what? Having followed Bruce all the way through in his preparation and so on, it seemed like it was almost a procession for him to start with. You know, he was going to do it anyway, but then he did have those tricky moments, and the fact that he was able to finish it off, I was so delighted. And I'm sure you were. And now that he's come home, and now he's been home now for nearly a month, I think, hasn't he? And I know he's been working really hard, and we're going to speak to him later on. Have you observed him since he's been home? Have you seen any changes in him, or how do you feel he is since he's been home?
You know, I think he's his normal self. I kept expecting him to be a little down or missing being on the trail or missing his friends, and he just jumped right in. I think he was his normal self. He was happy to see his friends and play golf, although he said he needs to hit the range a little bit. He's a little out of practice.
Yeah.
But he was so happy to be with his friends, and we had a family wedding that we were so excited about and so happy last weekend.
Nice.
And I think he had a lot to look forward to when he came home. And he was back in court this week, and although he did say he's starting to feel those old stresses again, you know, they're creeping back in.
Yeah.
Where the stress on the trail was, what am I going to eat? Where am I going to sleep? Where am I walking? You know, the daily stresses in life are different.
Yeah,
and he said they're starting to pick up again.
Well, it's funny. I think that, and I did speak to him before. I know I'm going to interview him later, but I did speak to him earlier to say about what he's actually been doing, and he's really made himself busy, hasn't he? Or maybe he was going to be busy anyway. And I think having something to do, and as you say, you had a wedding to look forward to, having something to do after you finish, I think is so much the best thing. Because if you just sit back and just not mope, but you just sit back and just think about it all the time, you'll start getting down that you're not there anymore. Well, a lot of people do anyway.
I can see where that can happen, but he's been very busy.
Cool.
In fact, I feel like we haven't stopped a minute since we got back. It's just been very busy for me with the beginning of school, but for him with getting back in touch with all his friends and all the things he's involved with, and catching up with people that he hasn't seen in 6 months. Yeah. He's been very busy.
Good.
But I think he's just jumped right in and been great. I will say, though, I miss the Monday morning podcast. I really do.
I've had a number of emails from people telling me that as well. That's really surprised me, but it's really nice. What am I going to do on a Monday morning now?
Well, I really like the Thursday ones. Don't get me wrong. I still listen to those, but I really miss the Monday morning.
Yeah, well, I do as well. But look, you were such a big part of it for Bruce, Cheryl, so I really appreciate you letting us know how he's been since he's been back. And I'll be talking to him later on, but for time being, we'll say goodbye now then, all right?
Absolutely. And it was just such a pleasure being able to support him, to see someone live their dream that he's had for a very long time. Yeah. I just was so happy to do anything I could to make that happen, but I'm very proud of him for what he did.
Yeah, he should be as well. I mean, I tell you, he's made the program 2 for 2 because we followed 2 people in the last 2 years and they both made it to the end. So that was great news.
That's right. And I look forward to hearing you make it to the end next year. Oh, God.
3rd time's a charm, eh? See how it goes.
No. It's going to be exciting. It'll be great.
It should be exciting. All right, then, Cheryl. Well, good to talk to you, and I'll speak with you soon, okay?
All righty. Take care.
Cheers, then. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Can't you hear the pride in her voice? You know, Cheryl was a little shy and not terribly forthcoming when I first spoke with her right back at the beginning of this podcast in November last year. You never know that now, though. Once we said goodbye after our chat and I stopped the recording, we carried on talking for about another 40 minutes. She was so enthusiastic about Bruce achieving his dream and was kind of reliving her climb with him and G-Bolt up to Katahdin. I had to cut it short because I still needed to finalise the questions I wanted to ask Bruce, and it was only 15 minutes away from when the 2 of us were due to speak. How supportive she's been all the way. As Bruce has said many a time, he's one lucky guy, and Cheryl is probably the main reason that he says that. So let's hear from Bruce now. Listen to him closely. I thought that he sounded different somehow satisfied. Not smug, just satisfied that his dream was done. Here he is. Okay, we're back on with Bruce. Hi, Bruce. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing really well. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, and this is the last episode, which is kind of spooky in many ways, and it's been almost a month since you summited on September the 1st. What have you been doing with yourself? Lazing around doing nothing? I suspect not in your case.
Yeah, it's been a little bit of a crazy month. In fact, tomorrow would be 1 month since we summited. Yeah. So some people who listen know it's somewhat sad news, but my father lived a great life. But it's kind of a neat story that right before I went into the 100-mile wilderness, I was able to reach my father, who had a fall in July. I was speaking to him in August, and I didn't expect to reach him for a while, seeing how he was doing. And it was clear how cogent he was, because he goes, I'm going to stick around here long enough for you to finish this hike. And so that was, pretty interesting that he was so aware of his own sort of health, his mortality, but also he'd been following the hike. And he was one of the few people who got the information from the spot, the personal locator beacon. He liked to look and see where I was in the evening. So the reason I mentioned that is shortly before I summited Katahdin, Cheryl learned that my father had an echocardiogram and a stress test, and his heart was only working about 20%. She didn't tell me that until after we climbed Katahdin, which I think was perfectly, sensible, and I certainly admire her decision. But I had always planned to take a week and drive slowly from Maine to Virginia and kind of decompress from the hike and sort of take it in, do some riding. But because of my father's health, I got back down to Florida pretty quickly. And Cheryl went down, and my sister and her husband from Connecticut came down. And we had a weekend with my father shortly after the summit. And then about 4 days later, he died. So when you ask me what I've been doing, I've been partially tied up with family matters. I'm the executor. I'm also trying to move back into my old life, working some. I'm trying to work less, but I've got a new venture I'm involved in. I'm still partnering a law firm. So I'm a little too busy, which people who know me would not be surprised. I always seem to try to jam more than I probably should into the day. So in fact, I will say this, I think this is of interest to listeners. A couple of days ago, I was sort of frustrated and a little stressed out. And I was reflecting on the trail, and I was noting that the stress from what I would call the normal work life before the trail was much more unpleasant, harder to deal with than the stress of being on the trail. Because the stress on the trail is, basic necessities of shelter and food and those things. And I was starting to say, gee, I kind of missed, I missed a simpler life on the trail because I was getting bombarded by a few more demands than I wanted. So that's a long answer to your question. But what I've been doing, I'm doing great, but I have a lot going on, and it's a little stressful, but I'm still incredibly thankful for the opportunity to be able to do the hike and complete the hike. And, life is going to be really good.
And you saw your father before he passed, which, is it not indicative, but it's certainly one of the things that you've always said how lucky you are in that if he was going to pass, he was able to see you fulfill that dream. And I think that's a fantastic thing for you to know. And I'm sure a wonderful thing for him to have realized that, that you'd actually done it as well. Was he aware of it when you went to see him on that weekend?
He was. In fact, when Cheryl and I first got to the motel in Millinocket, I sent him an email with a summit photo, and I just said, I made it, and with a picture of Cheryl and I at the summit. And I must have caught him, nearby, but he responded really quickly and said, congratulations. And then he put in all caps, now come and visit me. So
my dad was like that as well.
I think he knew it was time. And he even said to my sister, he said, your mother, meaning my mother, your mother's been waiting a long time for me. And my mother did die about 2.5 years ago. So it, and all in all, it was an incredible blessing, and that he didn't linger, he didn't suffer. He had his mind till the end, and we got to see him. So it's always sad to lose your parents, but if I can play golf 4 times a week when I'm 90 years old, and I can, live to 92 and have a, pretty good quality of life the whole time, that's a pretty good deal. If someone wants to write that up, I'll sign the agreement right now.
Right now, yeah. Now, this is meant to be more of a reflection with 1 month's hindsight. You've been home now a month. I know you've been busy and some, but I'm sure there's not been a day past that you haven't thought about the trail in some form or other. And when you thought about doing the trail over the years, and then you did it, was it as you imagined it would be, or was it more difficult? Was it different, or were there things about it that you suddenly thought, "Oh my gosh, I wasn't expecting this"?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in a broad sense, the trail was not very much unlike I expected. It was as expected in terms of most of the challenge, what you did on a day-to-day basis. As you know, and I think most of the listeners who followed the whole time know that I always said it would be the hardest thing I've ever done. Yes. And it certainly was. I think, maybe a third of the way through, we talked about this, and I said, well, I kind of thought it might be a 7, and maybe it's really an 8. And by the time I got to Maine and had been through the White Mountains, I think I said it was an 11. So to me, the surprises would be it was much harder than I thought it would be.
And is that physically and mentally?
It was both physically and mentally, and they're a little related. Just some of the, as you well know, and you have said many times on your own podcast, and the way I try to explain to people that when you cross into New Hampshire, it's a categorical different hike in many respects.
Absolutely.
It is just it's more than just, if you're looking at a continuum and just another step. It spikes how much different, more dramatic, but also more difficult it is once you get to the White Mountains and into Maine. So that was really hard. The other thing that was the biggest surprise was I didn't appreciate how dangerous their parts of the trail are. And then maybe people would disagree with me. And there weren't too many of these until you get to New Hampshire and Maine.
That's right.
But there are places where, particularly when you're descending in a steep area, that I found to be dangerous, just flat out dangerous. Some of the options that you had were not reasonable. I think one time I said, well, I'm not even going to let Cheryl know that, I had to do this, or
that's the spirit.
This was particularly difficult because some of the way you would have to ease yourself down or find footholds or take a little more risk than you wanted to, or it's wet and the rock's slippery and you're not sure if you're going to be able to find your way down, or you're just going to end up sliding 20 feet because you slip. And there were a number of places where I would actually get to a spot, and usually it was after you've already done 3 or 4 or 10 of these all similar maneuvers, and you go, really? Is that what you want me to do now after all of that? And how am I supposed to do that? And it kind of relates to, I think, the big thing that has really come together that relates an awful lot to my planning and the low moments emotionally is what I call the mismatch. When your expectations are out of alignment with reality, where you expect a certain thing and you get something different. So I think good planning allows you to expect certain things. A good example is the descent going north on Musalaki. As you know, is incredibly steep. Lots of people like you have slack packed it going north to south because it may be easier going that way.
Yeah.
I didn't do it that way. No particular reason other than that's the way I planned my hike those few days. I was so convinced that this was going to be perhaps the most challenging, scary, difficult, dangerous 1.5 miles of the trail that I was really prepared when I got to that spot. And when I finished, I said, that was tough, but that wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. And I really believe it was because of the mental state I put myself in before I did it. Just like some of these descents, I didn't really expect them to be as difficult, as hard. So they drive your mental approach down a little bit. And one of the ones I really like to tell people about, I mean, we've talked about my banana pudding moment, which is a similar mismatch. But when you climb down, you're kind of coming off of Sugarloaf Mountain in Maine, and you come down the Carabasset Valley. I had no idea how steep and I thought really dangerous that descent was. And there were times when you thought, you could fall off the edge of the world at some of these climb down. So if I was surprised, it was more difficult physically than I thought. It was more challenging emotionally than I thought. And it was more dangerous than I thought.
But at the same time, I still think it's fair pretty much all the way through, don't you?
Generally, I think, Cheryl and I talked about this on Katahdin, and I know, I'd love to talk to someone at Baxter, and I'm going to have a chance, as my friends at the ATC know. I do want to talk to Laurie and Suzanne and others and see what their thinking is about some of these challenges that I think are near too dangerous. Maybe it's because I'm 60 years old and I've got a different sense of risk and danger these days. The good example that I point to on Katahdin is as you know, there's a rebar in a couple of places where you have to climb up and climb down.
That's right. Yeah.
And there's a spot, and as I think all your listeners who are hikers know, going down is typically more difficult and more dangerous than going up. And when we came down to this area where there was this fairly small piece of iron and then one rebar, you had to literally slide to the edge of the cliff, hang your feet over the cliff, kind of use this little knob of iron to brace yourself, turn over on your belly, and then grab this rebar and then start going down backwards. And when I got down there, and Cheryl, as you probably know from talking, Cheryl does not like heights. And this was an incredible challenge for Cheryl to climb Katahdin. And she did great. But when we got to this spot, which is actually one of the very last spots above the tree line in the tough part of Katahdin, and we'd been doing this for over an hour going down. I got to this spot and I said, I don't know. I really don't know how Cheryl's going to do this. It's too frightening because the way you have to slide yourself almost over this cliff before you flip yourself over. And I was so proud of her when she just sort of and she didn't hesitate. She didn't, panic. She just sort of slid down, flipped over, and came down. But my point is, it would be really easy to add in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 more bars in there and make it a much more sensible climb or descent. The only thing I wonder is whether Baxter is so focused on conservation and the true wilderness experience that they want an absolute minimalist experience there. And if that's their theory, and I know it's a lot of what Baxter wanted when he donated that land, that's a legitimate, I think, goal. So once again, kind of a long answer to your question. Most of it's fair. Some of it's a little, I think, I do think some of it's a little too tough.
Yeah, I certainly hope they don't soften it up too much. I found it difficult myself. I really would like to keep it quite tough personally. So what about the weight now? What did you actually get down to? We haven't talked about yet what you were weighing for a while, because you lost weight, as I did, pretty quickly. How did you finish? And what did you start at and what did you finish at?
So I was about 10 pounds heavy when I started. You always fluctuate. The 2 months before I started, I ended up being really, really consumed by a business deal that I wasn't really expecting to take up my time. And so I didn't get a lot of my sort of training in. I didn't eat as well. I missed some of my shakedown hikes, and I literally gained some weight. But that said, I started at 252, and I finished at 205.
Oh, that's not bad, actually. I couldn't get over it. You never seemed to get the hiker hunger ever, did you, at any stage?
I never did.
Wow. Did you have what you wanted, though, didn't you? You never held back when it came to ordering food.
Oh, no. And it wasn't like I was skimping, but I never had that hunger that you hear about and that you experienced.
Yeah.
But I ate plenty. I ate regularly. Most of my weight I lost by Harper's Ferry. My doctors would like me to be around 210, so I'm about at that now, and the key will be trying to keep it there.
Yeah, what have you done? I know in the first month for me, when I got back, I carried on eating. In fact, for the 4 years I've been back, I've carried on eating peanut butter like a lunatic. But what are you eating? Are you eating any differently now to what you did before you went on the trail? Obviously, you're eating differently to what you did when you're on the trail. Or did you just go back into your same old eating habits?
Well, I decided to treat myself. I figured I had lost a bunch of weight and I could splurge a little bit for a little while, but hopefully not get things out of control. So in many ways, what I've done is I've actually tried to just enjoy some of the things I missed while I was on the trail. And I gave myself, 2-3 weeks to say, you can splurge a little bit. You can have, the ice cream you like. You can go have that pasta dish you love. You go have this that you never had. But that you got to control yourself. So I have been somewhat self-indulgent. I hopefully think within reasonable means, but I've recently said enough of that. I've got to be disciplined so that I don't start gaining back those 40 pounds that I'd like to keep off forever.
I lost 60 and came back 70 or 80. But I've since actually lost another 20. So it's just, I'm so up and down with my weight. And I think this hike certainly messed up with my metabolism. And I didn't have the discipline to take it off. So I've got to be careful with it myself. So what's been the reaction of everybody now that you're back? They want to know about it, or have their eyes started glazing over yet? Or are you still telling your stories and they still happy to hear them?
It's been really, really fun reconnecting with people. And maybe the most gratifying thing is I'll run into someone. I've done this everywhere, on the street, in the neighborhood, at the grocery store, at work. And people will say, "Hey, I haven't seen you. You look good. You've lost a bunch of weight." And I'll say, "Well, I was like," they said, "I know you were away. I listened to every single podcast. I read the blog." And there's all these people who have sent me well wishes and congratulations. And I didn't know they were following because, there's certain people I absolutely knew were following. Barb, I knew was following. Cheryl,
Yes.
I knew was following.
Yeah.
Certain people were very active with me on Facebook, what have you. But the number of people who were very close by, both, interested and following, and others, praying for me. I've been incredibly gratified. And it's been really fun to say, "Wow, I didn't know you were doing that," and they were sincerely interested, and that's been really fun. And most of them, well, on Tuesday, I'm a I don't know how I'm a bankruptcy trustee, and one of the things you have to do is hold these hearings once a month.
Yeah.
And these hearings, the people who file bankruptcy have a lawyer, so I know all these lawyers. So I've done this for 28 years. And I must have had 12 or 15 lawyers that day in these hearing rooms, and I'd say out of those 15 lawyers, 10 of them had been following this very carefully, very closely. A couple of them I knew had, because they had commented, but the number that had followed it and had questions, I was just, like I said, very gratified. And we sat there and ran over and were late to start hearings because the questions just kept coming and coming, and it was just so much fun to have this sort of collective dialogue about the trip and the things they were interested in. So far, it's been really fun.
We've had a very steady listenership because every single episode has gone over 1,000, every single one. So 1,000 people listening to a podcast, and to give you some context, about the top 15% of all podcasts get over 1,000 viewers.
Wow.
And the bottom 85% don't get over 1,000 viewers. So you've had over 1,000 viewers on every single episode without fail. So I think it's done well, and people have sort of stayed in touch with it as well. Now, we talked about your gear mainly in the early miles because you were very happy with your gear. But now you're done and you've done 2,200 miles. What held up well and what didn't hold up quite so well towards the end?
Let's see. The tent did great. The shoes did great. My sleeping bags did great. I had very few gear issues, actually, except I had a nightmare experience with my sleeping pads. I had, and I'm not going to disparage this company on the podcast, but I had 3 sleeping pads fail me within 1 month from the same manufacturer.
Really?
And the last one, I got to Shaw's, as you know, right before the 100-mile wilderness. And the day before I got to Shaw's, the second pad failed me. And if it wasn't for hiking with G-Bolt, who had an extra sleeping pad, I would have slept without a sleeping pad. And so when I got to Shaw's, they do have an outfitter there, not quite the panoply of choices. No. But I ended up with another sleeping pad from the same manufacturer. And on the 4th day in the 100-mile wilderness, it failed. And so,
oh my gosh.
And I will tell you, I was so concerned about not having a pad. I know that I was treating my pad gingerly. Really, I wasn't abusing it. Let's put it that way. So that was the only gear issue that I really, really had. I was That's so cool. pleased by my tent and how well it held up. I had some incredibly windy days. I had plenty of rainy days. As you know, I had snow on my tent more than once. I will say my tent was just this haven I had.
It does feel like that, doesn't it? You know, once you get in there, it's incredibly comfortable. It's a feeling that this is your little haven. You were just about to say the word haven, weren't you? It's an amazing feeling. You get in your tent every night, and it just works as a place that you feel comfortable, doesn't it?
For me, it really, really was. I had a nice routine, felt very comfortable there, and as I think you know, I only slept until the last 2 weeks of the trail. I only slept in shelter twice.
Yes.
And in the last 2 weeks, I was with G-Bolt, and he convinced me to stay in the shelter one night, which we had but to ourselves. And then we ended up staying one other night to just stay out of the rain. But for the most part, I was never in the shelters, and I really loved my tent.
Well, I just want to back up a sec because you said G-Bolt. Why on earth did G-Bolt have 2 air pads?
He used it. He's a hammocker, and
All right.
he used it in part for some insulation, but underneath him on cool nights.
All right, he used them.
And he liked having the flexibility of going in a shelter when he wanted to. So he had a pad, and he definitely used shelters more throughout the 2,000 miles than I did. And he wanted to preserve the opportunity to sort of cowboy camp on the beach or under the stars once in a while. So he knew he was taking on a little bit of a weight penalty, but he liked the optionality that he got from having the sleeping pad, even though he was a hammocker.
Now, I know this is still probably way too early to ask this because you're just starting your reflections of the trail, really. But several of my Mighty Blue shows have had this segment called "If I Did It Again." So, looking at the totality of your hike, is there anything you might tweak to make the experience even better? Would you go slower in certain places? Would you take in more views, or would you just do anything else differently?
Yeah, I thought you might ask me this, so I actually thought about that. There's not a lot I think I would do differently. I still like going from south to north.
Yes, definitely.
And this is sort of nuanced, but certainly the long distance hikers will get it, and hopefully I'll express this well. I think that I would like to spend a little more time on the trail between resupplies. I started finding that I would come into town, take some type of Nero and then a zero to do my resupply. And I like the comfort of not rushing around to do laundry, clean yourself, resupply. And I like kind of taking the break. For some reason, halfway through the hike, I started finding that those 0 days, I was getting itchy to get back on the trail. And I wasn't loving doing nothing, believe it or not. And so then, when did the 100-mile wilderness with 6 days of food, I kind of liked the experience of being away from town a longer period of time. So this is a more of a subtle or nuanced difference, but I still loved having Cheryl send me resupply, which was 90% of my resupply was still done by bots.
Yeah.
And of course,
yeah.
I really loved having Trailtopia. I liked having the dehydrated meals, and I would like to do that again because I think they're good. I think for what you get, they're light. So, as you know, not every town they are on the expensive side for some people resupplying.
Yeah. Yes.
But if money is you want to devote some of your resources to that kind of expense, sometimes you can't get them even if you want them in variety of towns. So I think the resupply by home is still very good for me. What I would do is spread them out a little longer where I might carry 4 or 5 days of food instead of 3 or 4 days of food. See, that's what I mean. It's kind of subtle. And I think I would plan long Neros and less zeros. So I would do, 5, 7 miles into town. I'd get my stuff done and get out the next day and get on the trail more and stay in town less. That would be one thing from a sort of trail hike structure point of view. I really like the equipment I took. the one thing I always thought gaiters were to keep, stuff out of your shoes, sticks and rocks out of your shoes. I think that they are. The thing I didn't appreciate, I think, and in the first half of the trail, because it was colder and winter and not as dusty, let's say, when it got warmer, I didn't appreciate how much the gaiters might help just keep my socks cleaner. And your socks are the most disgusting, filthiest thing out there. And I think I would wear low light gaiters just more to keep the socks a little cleaner. I never had a lot of problem with rocks and sticks. If I got one, it would just be, once every 2 or 3 days, I'd stop and get rid of it. So I didn't see the utility of the gaiters from a rocks and sticks standpoint. But now that I've done it, and I realized in the dustier, warmer weather on some of these trails, the amount of dirt that comes into your shoes and socks.
They get grim, don't they?
I think that's such a minor equipment change, but I still love my stove. If you're just going to boil water, I love my tent. Sleeping bags are, I like mine. There's a variety of sleeping bags that would do just fine.
Was your sleeping bag warm enough in the real cold weather as well?
It was.
What degree bag was it, Bruce?
It was 15 degrees. And the coldest night I remember, they told me it was negative, and not negative. They said it was 3 degrees with wind chill, because it was 15 degrees on the thermometer.
Nice.
I slept in my tent with rain pants and a puffy and a balaclava, and I really wasn't cold.
Amazing.
But yes, my sleeping bag was good in the cold weather. I actually got my warm sleeping bag back in right after Musalaki.
It started to cool down.
It was there were overall, this was a summer you didn't need warm things in New Hampshire and Maine. When Cheryl and I got to the motel after Katahdin, I was watching the news, and of course it was September 1, and they were saying how the average temperature for Maine for August was nearly a record high. So my point is that most of the time we were in New Hampshire and Maine, it was unseasonably warm. I didn't really need the warmer bag, but I think people planning and thinking about a hike should consider that you probably do need the warmer bag.
Yes,
I just happened to probably not need it. I did it. There were 2 or 3 nights I thought I needed it and was glad I had it, but overall, it was a warm summer in the Northeast.
Right. Well, look, we're going to finish up with one more listener's question of all things. How about that? And this question takes you back 44 years when you listened to Warren Doyle. He planted that seed of an AT through hike in your brain, and it became your Appalachian Trail dream. Well, you've done it. The dream's over now. So the question is a very simple one. What's the next dream? And by the way, the listener who asked the question has something of a vested interest. It was Cheryl, your wife. In fact, she then amended it 3 minutes before I called you, and she said, "Can you change it to, how can I help you achieve your next dream?"
Oh, how nice. How sweet.
How cool is that, eh?
I have a few. I actually thought you might ask me this question, and other people have asked me.
All right.
In terms of immediacy, and I'll do a little intro. So as you probably know, towards the end of this hike, I was ready to be done, and when I finished, I was, as some people like to joke, I was through hiking. I was all through hiking. And there was no way in the world I was interested in another 2,000-mile hike. But I like to think I was wise enough to remember that every time I ran a marathon, I said, I'll never do this again. And within 2 weeks, I was looking at where might I go to run another marathon. And in the 30 days since we summited, my mind has changed significantly already about getting back on the trail. It's not calling me, but the idea that I don't really think I want to do that again has left, and I am already realizing that, I probably would like to do that again. And it's amazing what time does. And I think the psychological device we have about filtering out the negative experiences of life. Um, in fact, Cheryl had a great, she goes, yeah, she says, if we didn't have this ability to filter out the tough things in life, she said, every family would only have one child. Which I thought was, anyway.
Nicely put.
So I want to, the number of things I want to do, but I've always wanted to go down through the Colorado on a raft, Colorado River on a raft.
Nice.
But I think the very next thing I want to do, and this ties into my love of family genealogy, is I'm pretty sure next thing I want to do is hike something like the West Highland Way in Scotland.
Nice.
My family comes from an island in the northwest of Scotland. I want to go do some more genealogy. And when I do that, I want to hike for a week or so and just absorb the environment, because the topography of that part of the world is a unique one, and
it's glorious up there.
And so that's probably, and that's something that's just 1 to 2 weeks. It's not a 6-month deal, but there's a number of things in my future I know, and most people know me, have asked me already. So what's next? Because they know I've done some things like the Camino and the trail. So I think the West Highland Way, if I had to really give you an answer, is I'd like to do that, and probably not in the too distant future. Probably, in the next 2 years.
Well, as she said, she's ready to help you achieve that dream. And, she said when we spoke earlier on, she said how great it was to be part of that and to be there right at the beginning, your first steps and also your last steps, which must have been very cool for the both of you.
I can't tell you how excited I was to have her there and to have her be part of the trip. Like you said, one of the hikers have joked that, Cheryl can take her photos from Springer Mountain, McAfee's Knob, and Katahdin, and just tell everybody she did a through hike, because those are the 3 most photographed spots on the whole trail. But
That's right.
It was an amazing thrill to have her finish with me, and I just can't tell you how proud I was of her to climb that mountain and sort of overcome some of her fears and climb down that mountain together with G-Bolt. It was just a great, fantastic way to finish.
Awesome. Now, and if actually, I'm going to ask one more thing, and if there's one thing that you could say to anybody who's on the fence, because a lot of people are worried about doing the AT, they're worried about the bears, worried about the food, worried about bad behavior, whatever it is they're worried about. If there's one thing you could say to anybody who's on the fence about doing it, what would you say to them?
I would say commit to do it and call me up, and I'll tell you why. Whatever your fear is, you can overcome it. And you don't have to be a superhuman to overcome it. There are a variety of strategies to overcome things, whether you're 20 or whether you're 60. And it's very doable as long as a good way for us to end. If you prepare and plan, I think it's very doable. And nothing I would rather do than talk to people about the trip and help them meet their own dream.
I'm sure. That is so cool. What a lovely way to finish. Well, look, it's been great for me, Bruce, as I said to you. I thoroughly enjoy following you all the way there. And, you and I are going to stay in touch anyway. But on behalf of everybody who's listened, and I'm sure everybody's really enjoyed it, thanks for doing this, because it's just been a blast for me.
And, thank you for doing it and asking such great questions and being so prompt. It's been really fun for me as well. So I'm just gratified that so many people found it worthwhile every Monday morning.
That's cool. People said they're going to miss their Monday mornings. How about that? That's pretty cool.
I told you I had all those lawyers on Tuesday, and one of them said, I really miss not having a podcast on Monday morning. So
well, tell them my Camino, there'll be a Monday version of my Mighty Blue show out on a Monday morning now. So when I do the Camino.
Well, now they've heard that. So everyone needs to tune in and listen to Mighty Blue on the Camino.
Okay, buddy. Well, you take it easy, all right? And we'll catch up soon, okay?
We'll be in touch. Thanks so much. Thanks for doing this.
Cheers. Bye.
Take care. Cheers.
Didn't you think he sounded satisfied? That he'd accomplished something special? That is exactly how I felt 4 years ago. I already knew about his father, and though it's always terribly sad to lose a parent, the fact that his dad saw the culmination of his son's dream must have eased the burden of death for both of them. But life moves on, and Bruce is getting his old stresses again. He's coming to realise, or at least remember, the simpler pace of life on the trail. It's tough, much tougher than Bruce and I ever expected it to be. But it gives you a peace unlike anything else that I've ever experienced. And how cool was Cheryl's question for him? She wants to help him fulfil his next dream. Life doesn't get any better than that when you have, as somebody once said to me, your person constantly in your corner. I know that we mentioned it in the show, but if you're at a loose end on a Monday morning and missing your hiking fix, you can start following Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, where I'll be giving twice weekly reports from the Camino de Santiago in Spain. Those episodes will be released on a Thursday and a Monday morning, so why not head over to iTunes or wherever you hear your podcasts and subscribe to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail. I think you're going to enjoy it. Thanks to all of you who have followed us every step of the way to Katahdin. Next year, it's my turn, but I'll be following somebody in the class of 2020 the year after that. So I'm going to finish with this. A member of the class of 2020, and I will see you soon.